Horizon, and I'm a licensed professional counselor with Banner Health. And I'm excited to talk with you all about compassion today. And just a little bit about myself before I get started. I have my master's in somatic counseling psychology, which incorporates the body into traditional talk therapy. And in that training, there was a lot of contemplative practices. So I have a lot of formal training in meditations and mindfulness, as well as compassion meditations. And I also use a lot of the things I'll be talking about today with my clients as well. So I'm excited to share that all with you. So, and to start off, I wanted to explain what exactly compassion is. There are slightly varying definitions for compassion, but in general, it's the awareness of and desire to alleviate the distress or suffering of others. You're feeling with another person and you have a desire to want to help them. And so there are different components for compassion. And some of the research, they kind of hone it into these three components that are you are touched by and open to suffering. And that open to suffering is really important because you're not turning away. And as that second piece says, you're not trying to avoid or become disconnected from that suffering. You're meeting it head on. And the last piece is that, it's generating this desire to want to alleviate the suffering. And you also want to heal with kindness. So it's just a desire, but it doesn't mean that you actually have to be able to change anything. And the way that I think of this in general is this concept of I see you, I hear you, I'm with you. And so I often use that a lot when I'm in session with folks when they're sharing about things, and just kind of keep that in mind to set that stage for compassion. And so one example I like to give around compassion is that I used to work with a lot of homeless folks, and they would often tell me about how people might notice them but ignore them. And I asked them about what that was like for them and what they prefer people would do. And so one example that a client had given is that, you notice the person that's on the street, you can wave to them, you can acknowledge them, or even just for yourself, acknowledge them and wish them well. You don't actually have to change their situation, but again, you can meet them with that compassion because you see that they may be suffering and you have a desire that they can, have some alleviation of that suffering. And so compassion sometimes gets used interchangeably with empathy and altruism. So I just wanted to take a moment to kind of separate out these three components because they're very similar, but they vary slightly. And so empathy is about the feeling and perspective. So it's our ability to take on the perspective of and feel the emotions of another person. And so the compassion is then the next step up from empathy, because you take empathy and then you add on that desire to actually want to do something about the person's situation. So empathy is putting yourself in the other person's shoes, and then compassion takes that the next step in that you want to alleviate their situation. And then altruism is the kind, selfless behavior where you seek to help someone else at a potential cost to yourself. So altruism is the next step from compassion, because with compassion, there's no expectation that you have to do it as a detriment to yourself, whereas altruism, you go above and beyond. And, an example is a firefighter who puts themselves in harm's way in order to save someone from a building that's on fire. So another piece that I wanted to speak to is self-compassion, because oftentimes I've found that people are pretty good at having compassion for other folks. They can think about, oh, okay, this person's suffering, I want to do something to help them feel better. Whereas we tend to struggle to have compassion for ourselves, and people have a tendency to beat themselves up. And so I often like to teach folks about self-compassion, because we often leave ourselves out of that equation. And so self-compassion is pretty self-explanatory. It's compassion directed towards yourself. And again, the way that it works is that you meet your pain or your mistakes or your failings with care and understanding. So it's not about ignoring ways that you mess up, but it's acknowledging that, sometimes we make mistakes and seeing if you can be kind to yourself or honor the fact that no one's perfect and that we too are going to mess up at times. And so in essence, self-compassion is honoring and accepting our humanness, because again, no one is perfect. We're always going to make mistakes. And the best thing that we can do to want to improve is to notice, like, okay, we messed up, and how do we learn from that mistake, and that we don't have to beat ourselves up in order to improve. And so a lot of times people feel that they can have compassion for others, but it's really hard to have it for themselves. But in research and just in the teachings, a lot of times people believe that in order to have true compassion for someone else, you need to have it for yourself first, and that you can't authentically learn to lean into someone else's pain if you aren't able to do that for yourself. Because if you're kind of ignoring your own pain, the idea is that you can't really do that for someone else. And also, the Dalai Lama, when he teaches about compassion, he is one of the folks that has said, if you can't have compassion for yourself, it's really difficult to have compassion for someone else. And, it can be hard to have self-compassion, and you don't necessarily have to have it fully figured out before you have compassion for someone else. And you can actually do it simultaneously. And I'll be speaking to some formal meditations later on in this presentation of how you can do that for yourself, of having self-compassion and also offering it to others. So there's many benefits to compassion, and I could probably go on for a really long time explaining all the different ways that compassion is good for you and other people. But I just wanted to highlight some of the major points around what makes compassion so great for us and others. And so one of the things is that research has shown that compassion increases people's well-being, their self-esteem, their happiness, their empathy, and it's because we're connecting to other people. We're wishing them well as ourselves. And research has also found that when we act compassionately, our anxiety can be lowered, as well as depression and our stress. And one of the ideas behind that is that when we acknowledge other people's suffering, we recognize that we're not alone and that other people are going through hardships, which can help with the anxiety and depression that someone might be experiencing. And then another piece too is that with everyone having differences of opinion and things like that, compassion is one of those practices that can help us accept and appreciate the differences or the experience of those with whom we have differences, and that, acknowledging that no two people are alike, but we all have this foundation of we all go through suffering and pain at some times, and that can help connect us. And also there's biological things that happen when we experience compassion, and studies have found that when we feel compassionate towards other people, our heart rate literally slows down, which can help with regulation and just in terms of how we feel in general. And then also we secrete the hormone oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone, and is often found with caregiving or connecting to other people. And then also the brain studies have shown that the regions of our brain that light up when we're feeling compassion are linked to empathy, caregiving, and feelings of pleasure. And so again, that often results in our wanting to approach and care for other people, which is another benefit of compassion. So when I was trying to think of different things to talk about for this topic, I asked some coworkers about compassion and how they felt about it, and there's also different studies about compassion and the myths that people often think about when they think of compassion. And a lot of these myths have to do with that self-compassion piece, because that seems to be a pretty big barrier for folks when trying to practice compassion. And so one of the myths that people often think of is compassion will make me complacent or weak, and that, you know, it's about letting yourself or someone else off the hook for making a mistake. But in reality, compassion, again, is being upfront with that suffering and not trying to ignore it or run away from it. And that studies have shown that self-compassion can be a source of coping, resilience, and actually be a motivator to improve. And oftentimes I get pushback from clients that I work with around having that self-compassion, because they do often say, well, then, you know, how am I going to get any better? And I often tell them, this is not my own. I got this from someone else and I don't remember the source, but it's this idea of you can't hate yourself into a version you love. And again, it's meeting yourself where you're at and being kind and figuring out what supports you need in order to move forward. Another thing that folks have come up with is that they feel like that compassion means sacrificing themselves, that they're not allowed to have a choice, or they can't set boundaries when they're trying to be compassionate. And again, compassion is that active choice. You are fully in it when you choose to do it, and that you can certainly say no or set a boundary. And you keep in mind that, okay, it might have a negative impact on the person, but again, your intention is to set a boundary, to take care of yourself, or to meet yourself where you're at. You can also, you know, ask someone how they were impacted by a boundary that you set. And again, that's acting from a compassionate place. And another piece that I often talk to folks, especially those who like to be caregivers and care for other people, is that, you know, this concept of you can't pour from an empty cup. If you're not taking care of yourself, if you're not having that self-compassion, it's really hard to show up and be of support with other people. And then lastly, one of the other things is that a lot of times people might think, well, what difference is compassion going to make? Like, I'm just one person. There's so much going on in the world. Like, I can't practice it because it won't make a big impact. And so one of the stories that I often think of it's called the starfish story. And it's of a man. He's walking down the beach and he sees all these starfish that are on the beach that got washed up because of high tide, and they're stuck on the beach. And then he sees this little boy, and he's going and he's picking up a starfish and throwing it in the ocean. And the older gentleman asks the young boy what he's doing, and the young boy explains, you know, I see that these starfish are stuck on the beach and I want to help them, so I'm trying to pick them up and get them back in the ocean. And the older gentleman is like, there's hundreds of starfish. How are you going to make a difference? And so the boy responds by picking up a starfish and throwing it in the ocean. And he says, well, I made a difference for that one. And that's something to keep in mind, is that, you know, even if you just make a small difference for one person, and that person could be yourself, you know, that's having a positive impact. And then another concept with this is a quote that's paraphrased from Mother Teresa, that not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love. And that's really what it comes down to with compassion, is that this desire to send out, you know, healing love or kindness to other people. And you don't actually have to change the situation at all, even if you just have that intention. In a lot of formal practices, it's believed that that in and of itself is a huge support. And, you know, and with that, with everything that's going on in the world, with, you know, wildfires, the coronavirus, unemployment, you name it, you know, it can be easy to think like, how can I make a difference in the world? And so again, compassion isn't about being able to fix anything. It's just being able to acknowledge the pain that folks are going through and lean into it, and, you know, also acknowledge the abilities that you have to try and make a difference. And if it's just sending that intention of healing, that in and of itself is good enough. So before I get to the formal practices for compassion, I just wanted to identify some examples from daily life that are really acts of compassion. So for instance, making yourself a cup of tea when you're stressed. That is an example of self-compassion because you're noticing like, hey, you're feeling off, and rather than beating yourself up about it, you do an act of kindness for yourself and make some tea. On days that you're just not your best, going for good enough when you can't perform, at your utmost best. And sometimes I joke with clients that it's like they showed up, they have pants on, they dressed appropriately, they did it. And because when you're really struggling, sometimes that's all you can do, and good enough is good enough. And so you can be compassionate towards yourself by accepting that. And then again, you can try again the next day. Another big thing that's come up in terms of having compassion for yourself is stopping and changing negative self-talk. Because again, you can't hate yourself into a version of yourself that you can love. And so it's just learning to talk kinder to yourself. And then by doing that, you might notice that you talk more kindly to other people as well. Another thing that is an act of compassion is having a growth mindset, and this can be for yourself and others. And what a growth mindset is just knowing that people make mistakes and trying to learn from them and see, if you need support, or knowing that you're doing your best and it's a mistake is an opportunity to learn. One big example, so I'm from New Jersey and there's lots of traffic and people cut you off. And so one of the things I noticed with moving to Colorado is that people are a lot nicer a lot of the times with driving. And so letting someone merge into traffic is a form of compassion, because you notice that they might be struggling and you just give them some space and acknowledge that and, do a little something for them. Another example, and this one came from being here at work, I noticed that there was a woman with her hands full and there was someone going through the door, and they could have just ignored it, not paid attention, and just went through the door and let the door close behind them. But they noticed that the woman was behind them, noticed that they were struggling with all the things in their hand, and they held the door. And again, these aren't big, huge things, but they can really make a difference in someone's day. So the next part of this is I wanted to just share 3 formal practices or meditations that you can do to help cultivate compassion. And these are about connecting to yourself as well as connecting to other people. And so a lot of for a lot of meditations, the foundation is a sense of mindfulness. Oftentimes, you're instructed to, find a comfortable seat, notice your breath. And so that's what mindfulness is. So I just wanted to give a quick example of that so that you have a place to start with some of these practices in case you've never had any formal training or experience with formal practices. And so what mindfulness is just simply having a present awareness of your thoughts, feelings, body sensations, and your surrounding environment. And the key is that you do that without judgment, and you're just noticing. And what mindfulness is going for is trying to foster an acceptance of the way that things are in the present moment. And so another piece is not over-identifying. So you might notice that your body feels a certain way, or you might have certain emotions, and it's just noticing rather than making a story up about what it means. And so the way to do that is you stay curious and you just notice, like, okay, my leg feels this way, or I notice tension here. And the way that I often help folks practice mindfulness or get used to this sense of self-awareness is through what's called a body scan. And here you just start again by having a comfortable seat, and you notice your breath. And again, you're not trying to change it. And then with a body scan, what you're doing is you move from your feet up to your head, or from your head down to your feet, and you're just notice each part of you. And you're mind will wander, and that's okay. And so when that happens, you just notice it, bring it back to your breath, and bring it back to the body part that you're paying attention to. And the goal is to just be descriptive. So you're noticing sensation, temperature, and pressure, or whatever else is there. And the reason that this is helpful for compassion practices is, again, you're not judging it, you're not turning away from any pains or things that come up, you're just noticing. And then in the next two practices that I talk about, you'll see that sitting and noticing your breath is the start of those practices. So that's why I want to share a little bit about the mindfulness. And then in the resource section, I do have a link to a mindful body scan if you want some more practice with it. So another practice for loving or for compassion is a loving kindness meditation. And so with that, the idea is that you're offering friendliness or care towards yourself. And then, it's the idea of that will then lead towards the same thing, like friendliness and care towards others. And another way that it's helpful is that it's acknowledging the negative, and then you're working to switch to something that's kinder. And so it's not that you're trying to ignore any troubles or struggles that might be coming up, but you're acknowledging that they exist, and you're, giving well wishes to yourself and then to other people. And so again, you find a comfortable sitting position, and you just settle yourself by focusing on your breath. And what this does is it just helps slow down your mind and your body. And then some people like to put a hand over their heart. You're welcome to sit however feels best for you. And there's all different kinds of loving kindness meditations, and some are more lengthy than others. And you can also make up your own. This is just one that I was taught years ago, and I actually have it written on my bathroom mirror, so it's a reminder on a daily basis to try to do it. And I often forget that it's there because it's been there for so long. But so all you do is you find your seat and notice your breath, and then you can say it out loud to yourself or just in your head, and it goes, may I be peaceful, may I be happy, may my heart remain open, may I know the beauty of my own true nature, may I be healed, and in my healing, may I heal others. And so you can offer that to yourself and then offer it to others. Other loving kindness meditations also, like you can pick a situation where you messed up or you're feeling bad about, and it's identifying, okay, let me bring in kindness or determination or let go of stressors or things like that, to support myself with that situation. And so there's all different kinds. This is just one example. And then again, there's a link in the resource section with an even different loving kindness meditation if you want to learn more. So, and lastly, I wanted to share about Tong Lin, because Tong Lin is the idea of taking and sending. So it's the idea that you're not just acknowledging someone's suffering, but you're trying to take it on and then give them healing. So it's not that you're actually like taking on people's problems or things like that. It's just visualizing taking in the pain of other people and then breathing out whatever benefit or healing they may need. So it's not that you literally have to go around and take on people's problems. Again, this is just a formal meditation to help you shift to connecting to others, and that they may also be suffering, and offering healing to them. And so just like with the loving kindness, again, you find a comfortable seat and you focus on your breath to slow down. And then for the formal practice, what you do is you start with feelings and kind of this general negative energy. So you think of breathing in feelings of heat, darkness, and heaviness. And some people are really visual and they'll see this, but even just having the intention of breathing in that negative energy is good enough. And so then when you breathe out, you think of sending out feelings of coolness, brightness, light, or just again, this positive energy. And so from there, you would then focus on other people and then the world. But sometimes it's really hard to do that. So the way that I was trained was that you can also start with yourself and start with a tangible like experience that you're having just to get a feel for this practice and then extend it out to other people. And so, again, what you do is you breathe in feelings of your own painful situation, noticing what it feels like to think about that and whatever emotions you had in that moment. And then when you breathe out, you can breathe out those feelings of healing or, being able to let go of stress or just bringing kindness to yourself. And then once you've gone through that, and you could do it for a couple of situations, or, you can do one situation for yourself and then move on to thinking of someone, like doing Tong Lin for someone you love and thinking, taking on anything they might be struggling with. And you don't need to know specifics. You can just have the intention of I'm taking on their struggles and I'm giving them healing. And then you expand the practice to others in similar situations. And again, you can keep it general. You don't need to know specifics. And then the next step would be that you actually take in suffering of people you've had conflict with or your enemies. And so again, it's trying to get to that piece of compassion, that that universal connection through pain and suffering, that, even if you don't like someone, they also suffer. And so that's what Tong Lin can help you do. And then the last piece of Tong Lin is that you can expand it out to the world and that, take on the energy of any negative things that people of the world are experiencing and then breathing out healing. And again, there's a link in the resource that explains Tong Lin a little bit more and goes into more detail. But with all of these practices, you can do it for yourself and then extend it to other people. And it's also called a practice. It's not about getting it perfect. And so just playing around with it and finding what feels best. So for this last slide, it's just some references that I use for the information and for the studies. And then again, those last three are where you can get more information about the body scan, loving kindness, and Tong Lin. So it's been great talking with you all, and I hope you got a little